Good evening, everyone. Dear Argentinians, as everyone knows, this administration assumed the presidency of the nation with a clear economic mandate to end inflation and generating the conditions for Argentina to grow sustainably in time. As I told you a few months ago, when we announced the exit of the Campbell Sepulchre, we came to fix the root economy without shortcuts or gradualism, and the only way to achieve this goal is through the tax order, the monetary order, and the exchange order. After a year and a half of efforts, our program began to show its first results. Inflation has plummeted, passing from an interannual rate of 300% when we assumed an interannual rate of 25%, and is just on its way to disappear by the middle of next year. We took out more than 12 million people from poverty, of which more than 2.5 million are young, and the indigency went from 20.2% to 7.3%. That is about 6 million people who did not have enough to eat today. In addition, private salaries have been systematically gaining against inflation since the month of April last year. These are some of our first results, but that does not mean that all the problems we have inherited have been solved, because it can't be fixed in 2 years, what was destroyed in almost a century. Therefore, before generating false solutions to the Argentines, we choose to be frank in telling them how hard the road would be, and to be firm when it comes to going through it, understanding that nothing valuable in life happens overnight. Today, I want to begin by thanking you once again for supporting us in the direction we have drawn, and ask you not to be fooled by those who have already taken the country to the world we are trying to get out of. In the last month, we have witnessed a new regrettable spectacle in Argentine politics. The Congress of the nation promoted a set of laws aimed at destroying the tax surplus that has cost us so much effort, and that is the cornerstone for economic recovery to be sustainable over time and for genuine growth. Using noble causes as excuses, they promulgated laws that irremediably lead to national collapse. The projects approved by the Congress, if we all add them up, which include reinstalling the provisional moratorium, increasing the salary of teachers, and increasing pensions by disability, among others, represent an annual spending of almost 2.5% of the GDP. This would imply an increase in the public spending equivalent to an IPF per year. Or, in other words, it would imply an additional debt of more than $300 billion, or an increase in the national state debt of 70%. It seems a noble claim, but when there is no money, it is more than a demagogic deception of part of politics that takes citizens as idiots. But unfortunately, this is not about the pensioners, the teachers, or the disabled having better incomes. This is about power. This is about a political class that was paid 2 years ago and is going to do anything in order to recover it, regardless of whether it implies destroying the stability of the country. Ever be easy to accompany any initiative at the Congress, increase spending, and misunderstand the future consequences, as the previous presidents did. It would even be beneficial politically, because many voters would have more money in their pockets in the months prior to the national elections. But my task as president is not to do what is convenient. I'm not here to look for shortcuts, but to turn the page of our decaying history. My task is not to seem good, but to do good, even if the cost is to say that I am cruel, and to rectify hypothetical present injustice, but at the cost of roughing our future once again. But first, it is important to explain why increasing public spending is so important when a state spends more than it collects and cannot be indebted or raise taxes. It uses monetary emissions to finance its expenses. This is nothing more than adding money invented from the mass of money that exists in the economy. which produces inflation. Inflation is always and everywhere monetary phenomenon caused by an excess of money supply, either by an increase in supply or by a decrease in demand, which leads to the loss of the purchasing power of money. That is an increase in the price level. In other words, if inflation was not directly linked to the amount of money in an economy, we could happily print tickets for everyone and abolish poverty by law. The harsh reality is that emitting money does not create wealth, but destroys it, because it takes value from the money that was already circulating, the money that was stolen by one of the Argentinians. Why? Because the amount of goods and services that money can buy is still the same, which means that there is more money for every good and service available. We call this inflation death. Those who have lived throughout hyperinflation know well that having more tickets does not mean being able to buy more things. In this way, the purchasing power is stolen from the most vulnerable sectors that cannot defend themselves from this upheaval. What makes this phenomenon so difficult to identify and so attractive for politicians is that it operates with a 18 to 24-month delay, dissociating the causes of its effect. In line with this, we set the amount of money a year ago, which will make inflation disappear completely by next year. What also makes inflation so tempting is that, by not being equally distributed to right society, it generates inequalities in favor of politics. That is, since a central bank does not deposit the money emitted to each of the Argentinians directly in their pockets, and therefore the pesos are not appreciated equally, and those who emit the money can spend it before prices are affected by the inflationary phenomenon. That is, whoever distributes, as always with politics, gets the best part. This is known as the Hume-Cantillon effect. At the same time, those who need to deny that inflation is a monetary phenomenon usually excuse themselves by saying that the value of the dollar is what determines the prices of the economy, and that the rise of the dollar will cause an increase in all prices forever. But this is false. When the monetary base is fixed, if for some reason a change in the composition of the demand in favor of a good A instead of good B, the price of A will rise, and therefore the expense and the good A will also rise, so that inevitably the expense and the good B will fall, and therefore also its price. Therefore, what raises the price of A is compensated with the fall of the price of B, so that the general level of prices does not change, but what happens is a change of relative prices. Therefore, the only way is that the central bank, to avoid the fall of the price B, emits money by raising the price of more than proportionally and giving rise to inflation. This means that, without monetary validation, or put in another way, with the monetary base fixed, the level of prices does not vary. That is why, when we finish cleaning the waste of the last monetary emission, the fluctuations of the dollar or the carrots have to impact on the general level of prices, and therefore the inflation rate. We must say it again and again. The only causal relationship that exists is from the amount of money to the level of prices. There is no causal relationship between the type of change and the level of prices. The amount of money is the one that will determine the prices, and if we leave it constant, the inflation will only be a bad memory of the past, the day the Congress and the nation imposing expenses without explaining their source of funding and without worrying about whatever ratio that source does or does not print money. By doing so, they are not proposing anything else or more taxes that destroy economic growth, or more debt causing a genocide against young people, our children, future generations, or more inflation that especially hits the most vulnerable sectors that they claim to defend. Of course, in high inflation regimes, the salaries of deputies and senators increase at the rate of inflation and did not lose purchasing power, so they did not suffer the consequences of their own irresponsibility. That is why, for them, it is politically profitable to support the vulnerable because they do not recognize or suffer the direct consequences of the policies they promote, whether it is to generate inflation and destroy the purchasing power of the people. This practice defines the caste in its entirety, and it is something that politicians of all kinds have done throughout history. As Sun Tzu said more than 2 millennia ago, the colored governor is able to set his own country on fire, and that is exactly what the Congress is trying to do with its constant ties to the fiscal balance. Not in vain, we're the first government in 123 years that has deficit zero after the payment of interests. It is paradoxical that the figure of the Parliament was originally conceived with the purpose of protecting the heritage of its representatives from the claws of the executive power. That is why, during the American Revolution, it was popular, the phrase of, "There is no debt without representation." In a healthy republic, the executive proposes taxes to be charged, and the parliament, representing the people, decides whether to accept them or not. In order to defend the interests of its representatives, the madness is that here, it is the parliament itself that intends to increase spending, which implies high taxes against the income of its representatives. The real world upside down. How far are we today from that ideal that we take is normal, that the Congress imposes to us, the great unlawful tax which is inflation? That is why, in the face of the continuous attempts of the Congress, of the nation to attack the economic program of this government and the prosperity of Argentinians, I want to announce that in the next days, we will be taking 2 measures to curb the deficit zero and the monetary policy of this government. First of all, on Monday, I will sign an instruction to the Ministry of Economy and the Nation to prohibit the Treasury from financing primary spending with monetary emissions. The National Treasury, through this act, will not be able to request money lent by a central bank to finance its expenses. This is a measure that, although in practice, we already implemented it, we are formalizing. Secondly, in the next days I will be sending a bill to the Congress to penalize the approval of national budgets incurred in tax deficit. This bill establishes a strict fiscal rule that requires the national public sector to attain a financial result with balance or see profit. Every new expense or income cut that affects this result must be cut in the same proportion. Each new expense that they want to spend must have a name and a surname. They have to say where it comes from and who they get it from. It will also establish a penal sanction to the legislators and officials that do not comply with these new fiscal rules. These measures seem abstract. Allow me to tell you what would happen if we had to ratify the laws that the Congress celebrates today. That is why, despite being the country with the worst default history of the last 100 years, we still lack access to international credit markets. That is why it would be virtually impossible to take a debt to finance the current expenses that the Congress is approving. Therefore, we should finance all these expenses with monetary emissions or by raising explicit taxes. Argentines already know what will happen if we finance with monetary emissions. We saw it a few years ago. It would form a snowball effect, similar to what we experienced throughout 2023, when inflation reached the rate of 1.5% daily, and the lives of all of us were out of control, in which we had no idea how much things were worth or how to preserve our purchasing power in the face of the high prices. That is just the most recent memory, and we have lived several similar experiences that have been put on our economy in the last 100 years. We take 13 zeros from our currency and we change the name 5 times, trying to start from scratch. However, the final result of each new adventure was the same: hyperinflation, the increase in poverty and social problem explosion. In short, a new crisis. If instead of resorting to monetary emissions, we resort to taxes, we uphold the restrictions, reimpose the country tax, the tax on real estate transfers, reuphold the San, the tax on earnings, increase personal assets, increase the number of products, increasing the lives of Argentinians, and re-uphold all the taxes we have lowered over the last 2 years. The problem is that increasing taxes destroys the future economic growth, which would result in less jobs and low salaries, and it would end up impoverishing us all. At the same time, the drop in activity would also end up reducing the level of collection, making the states have less and less money to deal with its obligations, such as pensions for disability. Even so, it would not reach the money to pay all these expenses that the Congress intends to impose on us. This would inevitably force us to print money and consequently inflation, instead of decreasing every month, begins to increase every month until it ends in a new hyperinflation. That is, approving all these Congress projects implies neither more nor less than going back in time and going back to Argentina in the past of impoverishment and decay, that is, throwing away all the sacrifice that we Argentinians have made by predicting the future, a business only for politicians. I want to be very clear about something. There is no possibility that I will allow this to happen. We will not go back. We will not go back to the past. We will not go back to the path of decay. And I tell the Congress, if you want to go back, you will have to kick me out. Argentinians, we cannot continue during the same as always and expect different results. If we want inflation to continue to decline, if we want poverty to continue to decline, if we want income to increase for the living standards of Argentinians to improve, then we cannot repeat the same recipes that led us to failure and pretend that magically this time they will work. It will not work. The economic policy of the state party only serves the politicians, not the good Argentinians. It is time to take charge of the truth. The only way for Argentinian income to improve sustainably over time was genuine economic growth, and the only way to grow is with tax and monetary order, with genuine growth. Everyone's income will improve. Private, public sector workers, retirees and social institutions. But there are no shortcuts in the economy. There is no easy way out. As in all the orders of life, the medical recipes lead to failure. If increasing public spending were a solution, we would be the most prosperous country, but not only in the world, but in the entire galaxy. For all this, know that there are only two possible paths. One is the one we offer, a different path that Argentina has never mentioned in its history. It is the path of genuine economic growth. This path is only possible by jealously guarding tax and property rights, which allow for saving, financing and investing in growth. It is a process that, little by little and sector by sector, is bearing fruit and will soon transfer its benefits to the entire economy. That the politicians know very well. That is why the Congress has redid it. A phrase of sabotage and obstruction. That is why they want to break the economy and drag us back into the abyss. They are aware that every step we take forward takes us further away from them regaining power and its privileges. They know that when Argentina finally falls apart, they will become nothing more than a bad memory of history. Once we Argentines learn that we can live better, it is a process that kept us subject to demagogues and populist governments. There is nothing more terrifying than knowing that we do not need them and that they must own their lives honestly in the private sector. The other path is one that we know well, because the one we have been transiting as a country for a century, the prevalent path of politics, the path of monetary elision and state servitude. It is the path that this Congress proposes to convince us that by printing money and giving it away, it works. According to them, wealth can be printed. But we already saw, not so long ago, that this path leads directly to collapse, because it is nothing more than a robbery and a mirage. We have already transited that path, and it led us directly to the most terrible of poverty. It led us to the destruction of our future, and in the recent past, it left us on the brink of hyperinflation that, without a huge sacrifice, we could not avoid. I think I have made it very clear. The choice we face today, as a country, we have to choose between responsibility or the magical realism, between doing the right thing, even though it implies having patience, or taking the shortcuts, and inevitably crashing again. The first 2 years of our government can be explained under an old logical paradox. What would happen if an unstoppable force was created? The unstoppable force is our determination to change the economic direction by implementing a program that was never done before in Argentinian history. The unstoppable object is the addiction of politics to public spending without backing, which gives them immediate credit, but destroys the future of all Argentinians. Each one of the sessions that have been seen in Congress over the last 6 months has been an expression of the clash between the unstoppable force and the unstoppable object. And today we are at the gates of the resolution of this conflict. Luckily for all Argentinians, the next elections in October will determine this paradox once and for all, and we will be able to choose a new Congress that allows us to move forward with the changes that the country needs. The unstoppable force of change, or the unstoppable object. There are no third ways in this clash. Today we have to take responsibility for the weight of the past to guarantee the future generations and plant a future. That is the basic task of a patriotic government. The moment we neglect it, we will stop being worthy of the trust that the people have placed in us. Today I ask you, members of the National Congress, to be at the level of the task that was entrusted to you in the last election, and I ask society to trust in the project. I assure you that this government will not falter in its fight to eliminate inflation, maintain fiscal superiority, and end the privileges of politics, with the objective of reshaping the country on path of progress and prosperity. And I remind you of a Virgilian phrase that Ludwig van Mises repeatedly quoted: "We never give up against evil. We have much more strength." May God bless the Argentines, and may the strength of heaven be with us. Thank you very much.